And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather showing next system coming into the western Bering Sea here, mostly north of the Aleutians, though that warm front bringing some rain into the Adak-Atka area. Diminishing winds here and showers along the western areas, drying out over the interior, just a few scattered showers around. Staying wet for the North Gulf Coast through this front just off to the south there and into the northern panhandle. And then tonight that front lifts northward, so another round of rain will come up into Prince William Sound and less shower activity here over south central Alaska, except for Cook Inlet, still some showers. Showers back to the west. Light winds, dry conditions over the northern interior to the Arctic coast with high pressure up there. Isolated showers to the panhandle. The system out to the west now bringing some increasing wind and rain into the central Bering Sea. Again, mostly north of the Aleutians, except for the two frontal zones, bringing some rain down to the Fox Islands and back to the west. And then that whole thing slides southeastward here on Saturday. And so a little bit of moisture starts to increase for Kodiak Island. Wet for the Bristol Bay Area, even wetter for the Alaska Peninsula. Rain changing to showers for the eastern Aleutians. Drying out with some sunshine. Highs maybe up into near or the lower 60s, Adak and Atka. And this low tracks northwestward from this position. Actually, this low here, this one dissipates. And early Saturday morning, this comes right across south central Alaska with a good shot of rain, maybe some wind. And then that change tapers off in the afternoon, but stays wet from the North Gulf Coast, especially along the frontal boundary there off to the east. And not too bad. Highs in the 60s, even mid to maybe upper 60s for the southern panhandle, depending on how much sunshine you get. And for the coastal water forecast for tomorrow, south coast, southeast winds 25 to 30 knots, southeast 30 on the central coast, east-southeast 25 to 30 on the north coast. Lynn Canal, south winds 20 knots with gale force gusts at 35 knots. And for Stevens Passage, Clarence Strait, south to southeast winds 20 knots, seas 4 feet. And for Saturday, small craft advisories on the south coast, southeast winds 25 to 30 knots, east-southeast 30 knots here for the central coast, and gale warnings there for the north coast there, east 35 to 40 knots with seas around 20 feet. Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, Stevens Passage, light southeast breeze at 10, and Clarence Strait, south at 20 with 5-foot seas. Prince William Sound, Friday, east winds 20 knots, east winds 20 knots for the eastern North Gulf Coast, and for the western coast here, north at 20, same thing for the Barren Islands, northwest 25 though for Kamishak Bay, Cook Inlet, north winds 15 to 20 knots with 4-foot seas. And for Saturday, Cook Inlet northerlies at 15 knots, light east wind at 15 knots for Kamishak Bay, southeast at 20 for the Barren Islands, and southeast winds 15 knots with 8-foot seas for the western North Gulf Coast. But good gales coming into the Middleton Island area there and the eastern North Gulf Coast. And also up in the Prince William Sound, east winds 40 knots there with seas up around 10 feet. And for Kodiak Island, north to northwest winds 15 to 20 knots. Alaska Peninsula, northwesterlies 20 to 25 knots with 2 to 7-foot seas. And for Saturday, here for the Alaska Peninsula, east-northeast winds 20 to 25 knots. Kodiak Island, east to southeast winds 20 to 25 knots. And Bristol Bay, east winds at 20 knots with 5-foot seas. Eastern Aleutians, front Alaska Island, northwest at 15 to 20 knots. Small craft advisories west of Unalaska Island, all the way out to Shimmy and Attu, 25 knots for Adak and Atka, 30 knots from the southwest from Amchitka Island out to Shimia. And then for the day on Saturday, 25-knot westerlies here from Shimia blowing right into Adak and Atka, and then 30-knot winds or 25 to 30-knot northwest winds here for the eastern Aleutians with 8 to 11-foot seas. For the southwest coast tomorrow, north winds 15 to 20 knots, St. Lawrence Island north at 15 and north at 20 for Norton Sound. Variable winds 20 knots for the Pribilofs and east at 20 with 13-foot seas for St. Matthew Island. And for Saturday, northeast winds 30 knots with 13-foot seas, St. Matthew Island, northeast 30 knots with 10-foot seas for the Pribilofs. Southwest coast here, northeast at 15 with 2 to 3-foot seas, northeast 15 also for St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound. For the Chukchi Sea tomorrow, north to northeast winds 15 to 20 knots there, seas not too bad, 3 to 5 feet, northwest at 10 knots For the western Arctic coast, northwest 15 for the central coast, and west winds 20 to 25 knots there to the east. And then for the day Saturday, eastern Beaufort Sea coast, east winds 25 knots, good for small craft advisories with seas up to about 5 feet, 15 knot easterlies for the central coast, back up to 20 knots for the west side. And for the Chukchi Sea, east to northeast winds 10 to 15 knots with 2 to 3 foot seas.